Welcome to Six Gun Guitars Luthier video series. My name is Brian. I had a gentleman email me and asked to have a little bit of clarification about the cam clamp article that I wrote on the website. So in this video we're going to talk about cam clamps. These are the ones that I've made. Cam clamps are not the most powerful clamps in the world. I mean, they're very, very strong, but they're not going to give you the same type of clamping action as like a bar clamp or a C clamp or anything like that. But for all the stuff that we do with guitar making, that type of pressure really isn't needed. So these guys are fantastic. They can be made out of a piece of 1x, in this case, maple, a metal strip here that can be purchased at a Home Depot or a Lowe's. The nails, the screws, everything that puts these things together can be picked up from a Home Depot or a Lowe's. So we're going to take you over to the bench now and I'll diagram how you make these. And it's a very easy process, it's an enjoyable process. Nice little break, kind of from guitar making, and you also wind up with something that you can use for guitar making. And the cost is absolutely incredible. You'll get these things down to just a few dollars a piece if you make them yourself, of course. Alright, now that we're over at the bench, I can show you a little bit more about the cam clamp. This is a piece of pine that I've got for demonstration purposes. I ran out of maple actually, so I don't have any to show. But the biggest thing that you want to do is pick up a piece of pine board, a piece of maple board, and you can get it from a wood supplier, you get it from Home Depot, you get it from Lowe's, get it from anywhere you can. The big thing that you want to do is you want it to be flat and you want it to be well seasoned. You don't want it to be too old or brittle or have knots or anything. But the other thing too is you want it to be flat sawn to the faces, meaning that you don't want to see all the lines going through it just like you do in a soundboard or a back and sides or anything like that. You want it to actually be flat sawn, because when you wind up cutting the pieces out here and starting to use them, you're actually going to use the clamp this way. So this is the area that's going to take all the stress, which will actually wind up being quarter sawn if it's flat sawn to the faces. When we turn it up, it'll be quarter sawn. So a basic rundown is you're going to need some maple. What I did last time was I picked up a piece that was probably about, I want to say probably 8 inches wide and maybe 7 or 8 feet long, and I just went ahead and ripped out strips that were 1.5 inches wide. Now the length of the strips varies on how deep you want your clamp to clamp. So, something like this, around 9 or 10 inches, this is going to get in fairly deep, all the way up to the spine. But in some clamping applications, like into the sound hole, grabbing the bridge, or even just kind of getting across and getting them all scooted in together, sometimes it's nice to have some clamps that are even up to 12 and 13, 14 inches. And you can decide that when you go ahead and rip your big long strips out of your board, maybe knock off a few that are 8, a few that are 10, a few that are 12, and kind of see which ones you use, and then it'll be easy to go back and make more. So the first thing, like I said, I cut everything to width, and then I decided on my length, and I chopped them all into little blocks like this so they were all fairly identical. The next thing you're going to need is a piece of steel bar or aluminum bar from Home Depot or Lowe's. Really doesn't matter the type or the size. These are pretty thin and they have no problem holding, because you're not going to be bending against the flat side, you're going to be bending against the tall side. So it's going to be very hard to bend it anyway, really, no matter what it's made out of. The other things you're going to need, I picked up a bunch of these little nails. Now instead of using the rivets or anything like that, I just picked up these short little nails. They're about 1 inch long. And what you're able to do is plug your holes that we're going to make with these guys, cut off the ends and peen them over. And they make quick, inexpensive little rivets, basically. You could rivet it if you want, or you could use those little circle guys that have the slit cut down on that you shove through it and expand. I mean, there's a lot of different ways to do it. This is just a really quick way of fastening them, and you get a whole box of these, enough for, God, probably 50 clamps or 60 clamps for like $4 or $5. And the other thing you'll need is a box of short screws, like 1.5 inch screws. And the reason that you're going to need those is there's a spot that's right under where the cam actuates under here. And that spot is under a lot of tension. So what we do is we drive a screw in there, so that way when the cam is opening and closing, that area has a little extra something to kind of hold it together, so that way it doesn't crack and fall apart on you. So after you got your material ran to thickness, what I wound up doing was I started on my bottom piece. And what I did was I just kind of traced out, I knew I wanted to have 1 inch or 1.5 inch pads, so I went ahead and I marked that off, and I just kind of came back and drew a little line down, a nice fair curve down that got me, about a 1/2 inch down or so, just to have a little bit of throat clearance kind of in there in case I need to get around braces or anything like that. And I just kind of you want to lay your bar stock, whatever length you want it to be is going to be how far your clamp opens. And again, you really doesn't need to have to open too far. Really, the only biggest thing you're going to clamp is around the, around the body as you're putting the sides on. So I mean, there's really no need for it to be too big, but I did these things around 12 inches just to have a little versatility. And I moved it in at least the length of itself, just so that way I had a little extra meat over here. And the way that I did that was I just notched the end. I took it right over to the bandsaw and I ran it in about 3 times, and it cleared out a slot that I was able to go ahead and slide this guy right into. So once it was slid in, I drilled 2 holes through here, right on the drill press, that were just big enough to get these nails through, and I popped the nails through, and now that holds that in really tight without allowing it to move. So basically your step 1 is to go ahead and determine how big you want your face to be. Like I said, 1.5 inch is probably good enough. Then go ahead and make yourself a little concavity, leaving yourself enough room for this guy, which depending on the width, might change a little bit. But the way I like to do it again is if your width is say 1 inch, leave 1 inch in front of it and 1 inch behind it, and that's where you start your concavity there. So after you've got a bunch of those made up, you can turn over to the top, which actually in itself looks more complicated, but it really isn't. It's pretty much another bottom piece, made almost the exact same way, except there's this slit that runs all the way through it. So what I did was first I ran into the back side, over and over with the bandsaw about 3 times, so that way I had enough room for the band to clear through. And then I went and got on the table saw and I cut this hole in through here. Now you can only get it up so far because obviously the roundness of the blade. So once I got it as far as I wanted it, where actually the bottom end was cutting out deeper for the blade, I went ahead and took it off, brought it onto the bandsaw, and went ahead and cleared that out. So that way it is a nice flat backed hole right there. Then the next thing you want to do after that is you need to make a home for the cam. And the way this works is the cam itself sits in this little slot that's in here. And the slot that's on the top I actually just made by flipping this guy upside down and running it through the table saw with the table saw blade only set to come up this high, so that way it doesn't cut into this bottom piece. And let me see if I can get this out of here. Yep, and that one really doesn't want to come out of there. So long story short, before this cam actually goes in there, you're going to turn this guy upside down and run it through the table saw. Run it through a couple of times just to make a slot that is wide enough to put that cam in. And forgive this crack right here, I actually just did that when I was banging on it, but this is my demo, my very first one, so this one never gets used. But you'll wind up with a slot that has the profile of the blade on the inside because you cut it in upside down, so it has plenty of room and a nice curve in here for the cam to kind of lay in when it's not in use. But it also clears all the wood from in front of here, so that way when you do lift the cam up, it pushes the bottom part of here down. And that's what actually sets your clamping pressure. When you push that out and it grabs against your bottom piece, that's what's actually going to make the clamping pressure and grab. And then you release it and it brings it back up. So after you've cut all that stuff out, I'll come back with the bandsaw and I'll cut my little kind of slot in here, so that way I have a little bit of clearance again for the braces. The next thing that I'll do is I'll drill a pilot hole for the wood screw that I'm going to use. And I want the wood screw to go almost all the way through here, but kind of just behind. Don't actually get into here, but you want to go just behind. And what I did was I pre-drilled it, I filled it with wood glue, and I drove that screw in there, so that way it's never coming out. And it's got a hold, and it's got a really good hold on here, so that way as this comes up and down and flexes in here, the screw is helping to hold everybody together. Lastly, the bolts. The most important thing to know about these is that the top one needs to be on the front and the bottom one needs to be on the back. When you have your piece coming through here, what's happening with the clamping pressure is it's grabbing this front piece and it's lifting it up. The thing that's inside of there is pushing up. So if this guy, your slot there, if it's not on the top, it's not going to do anything if it's on the bottom. It's just going to go right on up and flop over, which is the reason why you can let this go and it just flops right down. So your ones on the bottom go directly through the tape because you want to keep that metal bar in there. But the ones on the top, you need one just behind it and one just in front of it. And it doesn't matter if there's a little bit of play in there. That's totally fine, a little bit of chatter, because as soon as you lock that thing in there and you lock the cam, it's going to stop all that. But again, make your cuts, carve your recess out so you have a little bit of room for your braces to kind of hide in there. take the whole piece, turn it upside down, and run it into the table saw a few times with the blade only set to cut through to the original cut you made, and you'll make a nice little recess for your cam. And then you'll be able to put the whole thing together and give it a little test, you know, and see if she works, and it'll be nice and tight. And after you've made one, and you know it works, and you know it's the size and the spec that you want, you'll be able to easily run off a dozen or more. Now to make the cams, all I did was take and make a little tear-shaped, kind of teardrop-shaped piece of wood that was about the same size as the hole I made with the table saw, the little concavity that I made on the top for it to live in. And some of them are a little off-size, some are bigger, some of them are smaller. It really doesn't matter as long as they're all kind of about the same. I just laid them all on a piece of wood, just a piece of poplar in this case. I just laid them all out on there, kind of like this, so I could get a twofer out of it when I was cutting them in half. And cut out a bunch of them. The big point is when you make your hole in there that's going to go through the cam, you want to make sure that your little hole on here is just off center. And the reason you want it to be just off center is when you get it on here and you turn it, you want it to start adding more wood to the bottom of the clamp, and that's what's going to actually push down the little flipper. So if it's in the middle, the wood doesn't change, but when it's off-centered and you turn it, it adds a ton more wood down here and then subtracts it. And your very last thing you'll wind up doing is you'll put that guy on there, which will be slightly off-center. You could probably even drill it like that because it'll end up off-center anyway. Drill right through and go ahead and put your nail through. Now the other thing that I did with these nails was after I was done, I went ahead and cut them all off with a Dremel and a cutoff wheel. You could do it with a hacksaw too. And then I came back with a hammer and I put these guys on the concrete floor. You can do it on a small anvil or whatnot. And I gave them a few good hard hits. And what that did was it peened them over a little bit and it kind of bent them slightly while they're inside of these holes. And what that's doing is it holds them still so that way they don't come out. And then you can use your clamp. And lastly, I went ahead and got some cork. And I picked this up from, I think it was Staples or something a long time ago, but it's just 1/8 inch thick cork. You use it to redo your cork board. And I went ahead and faced all these guys with cork. So that way it's a little bit more forgiving on the guitar surface and whatnot, and it isn't going to mar any finish, or it isn't going to scratch anything that you've spent a lot of time sanding. But that's it for cam clamps. I mean, if you have any other questions, please email me. I know, like I said, this was an email that prompted me to do this video. The online article that I've got on sixgunguitars.com under the articles tab that shows some pictures and some stuff like that and tries to give you a pretty good overview. I mean, people are asking for a diagram and technical specs and stuff like that, and I could probably post something like that just based off of this. But I mean, really, it is a 1.5 inch wide piece of wood that's a 1x thickness, just regular old lumber thickness. And you cut your shape in there, you cut one slot this way, you run the table saw in this way to make room for your cam, and you put your tape through here and your couple of pinholes and it's done. I mean, there really is not a lot to these things. I mean, you can put one together, and first one might take you an hour or so to get together, but after that you'll put the next dozen together in a couple hours. I mean, it goes really quick. And it's really nice too, because you'll get the cost down to $2, $3, $4 a clamp once you get them all together and really start getting into production. But anyway, that was Six Gun Guitars Luthier video series. Appreciate you coming back and taking a look.